Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Megan was always seen as a centered woman, one of those who maintain order even when life tries to throw off balance. Married for almost 10 years to Brian, she had built a comfortable routine. It was the kind of relationship where everything worked, or seemed to work. They had an organized home, bills paid on time, planned outings, and some couple traditions they made sure to keep. But over time, the spark between them started to fade. Conversations became more objective, affection dwindled, and the days became exact repetitions of each other. There was still affection, but intimacy was slowly dissolving, as if they were living side by side without really looking at each other. At the office, the atmosphere was different. There, Megan felt more alive. The laughter among colleagues, the improvised lunches, the side conversations while the boss talked about deadlines. That's where Travis entered her life. An older man, confident, with that demeanor of someone who already knows the effect he has on women. He was never inappropriate, but his words carried a rehearsed charm. Megan knew the stories. She had heard from 2 co-workers that he had been involved with married women. They talked about it as if it were a mischief, something between forbidden and irresistible. There were no judgments, just a kind of excitement disguised as secrecy. One of them even joked that he was like a one-night addiction. Megan laughed along, pretending indifference, but a part of her became curious. Maybe because of the lack of emotion she felt at home. Maybe because of the way Travis looked at her in the hallways, or how he complimented details that Brian no longer noticed. At first, they only exchanged a few messages in the team group chat. Then came private conversations. Always light, always with a layer of double meaning. Travis knew how to advance and retreat at the right time, and this made Megan feel desired in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. And that affected her. It was like lighting a match in a dark room. The feeling was dangerous, but addictive. The messages started taking on a different tone. The flirting, which before was only suggestive, now had a time, place, and clear invitation. Travis knew what he was doing. He had experience in this kind of game. He was direct, precise, calculated. One day, while Megan was drinking coffee at her desk, he approached from behind, discreetly touched the back of her chair, and said in a low voice, without even looking at her, "I'm leaving early today, right after lunch. My apartment is nearby. I'll wait for you there. We'll have an hour." And he left without waiting for a response. Megan froze. She felt her face heat up and her heart race. That direct proposition seemed unreal, but at the same time, it carried a tension she couldn't explain. For the rest of the morning, she tried to focus on work, but her mind kept going back to that sentence. She thought of 1,000 reasons not to go. She thought about what could happen, the consequences, everything she had to lose. But deep down, the decision had already been made. When the clock struck noon, she told a coworker she needed to leave to take care of something personal and grabbed her bag. The building where Travis lived was practically next to the office, so it only took a few minutes to walk there. He opened the door the moment she arrived. He had a firm look, almost cynical, as if he already knew she would come. It was clear this wasn't the first time he had done this. Nothing about that meeting seemed improvised. The dim light of the apartment, the background music, the way his jacket was casually thrown on the couch, it all seemed meticulously planned. Megan walked in, trying to act as if she had control of the situation. Travis greeted her naturally, as if she were someone with whom he had an old agreement. He said they had exactly 50 minutes and that she didn't need to say anything. He offered her a glass of wine, made a quick comment about her perfume, and in a matter of seconds, closed the distance between them. Megan, without saying a word, let it happen. She felt her body being guided, and her mind, numbed by the whirlwind of sensations, simply followed. It was intense. Quick. Cold, even. Travis knew exactly how to guide the moment, as if everything followed a script he had used before. When it was over, he stepped back, gave a satisfied smile, and said he needed to return to work. Megan composed herself, fixed her hair in front of a mirror, picked up her bag, and left. She walked back with firm steps, trying to appear indifferent, but inside, her heart was still racing. She entered the office building as if returning from a regular lunch. No one noticed anything. No one suspected. And she, convinced that this would be buried in oblivion, went back to her desk, responded to emails, and spent the rest of the afternoon repeating to herself that it would never happen again. What she never imagined was that everything that happened in that room had been recorded. Every movement, every sound, every second. And that one day, it would escape from where it should have stayed forever. On the way back, she kept repeating to herself that this was just a mistake. A one-time episode. That it wouldn't happen again. She deleted the messages, blocked Travis's number, and decided to move on with her life. But what she didn't know was that Travis had a sick habit. He filmed everything that happened in his bedroom without the women knowing. And that night, which Megan believed she had buried forever, was recorded with perfect sound and image, waiting for the day it would all come to light. Megan spent the following days as if fulfilling an invisible penance. If anyone looked from the outside, they'd say she was the same as always. Arriving on time, smiling at co-workers, exchanging messages with Brian throughout the day, and still giving attention to friends who, coincidentally or ironically, had also experienced similar situations. They talked about it with unsettling nonchalance, as if it were just a chapter out of the ordinary, something everyone had the right to experience at some point. They said the important thing was to know how to come back, maintain control, close the door after opening it. Megan listened carefully, absorbing each justification as a way to ease what she carried inside. Over time, that memory stopped being a burden and began to feel like a story that only existed in her mind. A secret without witnesses, a mistake without proof. At home, life with Brian took an interesting turn. He started becoming more present, more affectionate. He prepared simple dinners on ordinary days, complimented her new haircut, asked if she wanted to watch something together. Megan was confused at first, as if expecting him to have noticed something, but over time, she concluded it was just a good phase. Maybe he was trying to rekindle something they had let cool down, or maybe it was just the reflection of a lighter woman, who smiled more often and spoke with more enthusiasm. Either way, it made her cling even more to the idea that everything she had done hadn't changed anything in fact. It hadn't affected the relationship. And if it caused no harm, then perhaps it really wasn't as serious as she initially thought. Weeks turned into months. Brian showed no signs of suspicion. Their conversations flowed more easily, weekends became less silent. Megan found herself believing that, in some strange way, that slip-up had brought new energy to their marriage. It was as if it had broken down an internal barrier that prevented her from seeing her husband in a different light. She began to appreciate the small gestures more, sought closeness, and laughed at his jokes with more sincerity. The man she had married seemed to be back. Or maybe it was her who had rediscovered herself after so long operating on autopilot. In her mind, it was like she had taken a shortcut to find the main road again. Her friends continued their Friday gatherings. Amidst glasses of wine and overlapping conversations, the topic of Travis came up occasionally. None of them spoke with guilt. There was an unspoken pact that everything involving that name should stay in the past. When someone mentioned it, it was always in a joking tone or with short phrases, like, "It was just an adventure," or "He knew what he was doing." Megan kept up the laugh, but inside, she began to feel something strange. A discomfort that arose when someone talked about how experienced he was or how he always seemed to have everything under control. It was as if something in her knew that it wasn't over, even without any real reason to think that way. She decided to bury it once and for all. She deleted all the old messages, cleared the chat history, wiped the phone records clean. She wanted to get rid of any trace. More than that, she wanted to believe that none of it had left marks. Life with Brian continued peacefully. They went out to dinner, planned a family trip, and during one of those nights when they lay closer than usual, she looked at him and felt a pang of guilt mixed with relief. She thought about telling him. About confessing everything. But the idea died before fully forming. It would carry the weight of a bomb. It would destroy what they had rebuilt. And in the end, she concluded that silence was the best path. A mistake is a mistake, she told herself. But an exposed mistake is a tragedy. And Megan thought she had escaped the tragedy. The confidence she felt in her own narrative grew as the days passed without anything from the outside threatening the castle she had built. Travis seemed to have disappeared from the company. People said he had quit and accepted a job offer in another city. His departure was discreet, without formal goodbyes, and this reassured Megan. To her, it was as if the past had been swept away with him. No one talked about it anymore, and there were no signs that anyone knew anything. The days returned to normal. The marriage seemed stable, work flowed, and the guilt slowly dissolved, as if time had the power to erase traces. Megan believed she had won. That the secret that had tormented her for a while was truly buried. That what she had lived with Travis would stay only with her and her friends. They also moved forward, each dealing with their own silences. None of them showed regret. The past had been sealed like a pact between accomplices who wouldn't leave any traces. And for a long time, everything went well. The world remained intact. But what Megan didn't imagine was that not every pact survives time, and some secrets, no matter how well hidden, still breathe in the dark, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Travis's name came back into Megan's life in the worst possible way. She was at home when Brian called her, without changing the tone of his voice. He had his cell phone in hand and his eyes fixed on the screen. He just said that there was something she needed to see. Megan thought it was news, a funny picture, anything. But as soon as she looked, she felt her stomach churn. The frozen image of a video filled the screen. A second later, the video started. And there she was. Her face. Her gestures. Her body. Everything visible, explicit. Travis also appeared, from different angles, as if the scene had been captured from more than one camera. Megan pushed the phone away with a jerk and tried to say something, but Brian had already gotten up, dropped the device on the table, and silently headed to the bedroom. She stood motionless for a few seconds, trying to understand what was happening. The video looked like it had been taken from an adult site. The quality was too high to have been accidental. The angles were deliberate, positioned in places only someone accustomed to doing this would know how to use. The feeling was of being invaded. Expelled from herself. A video that, until that moment, she had no idea existed. And the cruelest part, everything was happening right in front of Brian's eyes. The man who shared her life now also shared the embarrassment spreading across the internet like a plague. Minutes later, she received a message from a friend, "Have you seen this?" The response came before she even thought. She typed only a "what," hoping it was about something else. But the friend sent a link. Another video. It wasn't just her. Other women from the former office were also exposed. Travis's face appeared in almost all of them. He had recorded everything. Everyone. And now it was going viral. Adult sites published it with catchy titles, messaging groups circulated edited clips, and even fake profiles began appearing with compilations. A complete scandal, without filters, without control. Megan tried to say something, anything, but Brian was already standing. The phone was still on the table, the screen now dark. He walked toward the bedroom with firm steps, opened the door, and locked it behind him. She sat frozen, her heart pounding, feeling heat rush to her face and hands. She wanted to run after him, explain, cry, kneel if necessary, but the sound of the lock turning from the inside killed any impulse. She slowly approached, pressed her ear to the door, but everything was silent. No sounds. Not even footsteps. Not even heavy breathing. It was as if there was a void on the other side. She spent the night sleepless. Sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. Her mind spun in circles, trying to find a way to reverse what had already been done. In the morning, Brian came out of the bedroom, wearing the same clothes from the day before, passed by her in the living room, and grabbed the car keys. His eyes were swollen. His face tired. He looked at her for a second but said nothing. And left. Megan spent the entire day at home, waiting for him to return with a word, a question, even a shout. But when the door opened in the late afternoon, he entered, went upstairs, and locked himself in the bedroom again. That night, she tried sending a message to Travis. The number was out of service. She tried social media, everything deleted. His profile had vanished as if it had never existed. It was as if he had prepared an escape route. As if he had known, from the beginning, what he was doing. This realization chilled her. Travis recorded everything. And from what the messages and comments showed, other women were in the same situation. Megan wasn't an isolated case. She was part of a pattern. Part of a dirty game she never imagined she was playing. 2 days passed. Brian didn't exchange a single word with her. He slept locked in the bedroom. He ate out. He avoided any attempt at contact. Megan left notes. Sent messages. Tried to talk in every possible way. No response. On the third day, she got up earlier and decided to make coffee. A simple gesture, perhaps foolish, but it carried a last thread of hope. When he came downstairs, she stood waiting. Brian looked at her for a few seconds. His face remained expressionless. His voice was low but firm, "You need to leave." He said it like delivering a verdict. There was no anger in his eyes, no sadness. Just a quiet pain, the kind that had already given up fighting. Megan didn't argue. She went upstairs, grabbed a small suitcase, stuffed some clothes, a charger, documents. She came down and stopped by the door. Brian was leaning against the living room wall, staring at the floor. She opened her mouth, but he raised his hand, asking for silence. She understood. She left without looking back. There was nothing left to say. Out on the street, she wandered aimlessly. She tried calling one of her friends, but the call went straight to voicemail. She sent a message to another, but there was no reply. When she opened social media, she realized she had been removed from 2 groups. One acquaintance posted a generic phrase, full of morals and indirect jabs. Her name wasn't there, but the intention was obvious. Megan felt the world pulling away. With every notification, more pain. The video was still circulating. People were still commenting. Platforms tried to remove it, but new links kept popping up. Sites replicated it, fake profiles created content around it, anonymous people made jokes as if she were just a character. But she was real. She was alive. And she felt everything. Travis disappeared. No sign, no apology. No attempt to fix what he had done. He turned to dust. And she was left with the aftermath. Carrying the weight of a mistake she thought was buried but now dragged behind her wherever she stepped. The betrayal that once lived only in her memory now existed in videos, in words, in stares that followed her on the streets. What started as desire turned into ruin. What began with an informal invitation in the office hallway was now an open wound in front of the world. She, who believed she had control of the situation, discovered in the most brutal way that she controlled nothing. That it only took one choice, one impulse, to lose everything. And in that moment, alone, with a suitcase in hand, Megan realized that the true punishment wasn't being exposed. It was being forgotten by those who once smiled with her, and now pretended she never existed. Months passed, and the divorce was finalized. Signed without a fight, without lawyers in the room, without exchanges of insults. It was as if both had already understood that everything had been completely destroyed and trying to save anything would be like salvaging rubble after a fire. Brian left the paperwork organized, reviewed the terms with precision, and didn't even bother to ask if she agreed. She just signed. She was so exhausted, so drained, that her only wish was to finish it quickly. Neither of them wanted to divide assets in detail, because what mattered most, respect, the bond, the dignity of what they had lived, no longer existed. The ending was dry, direct, definitive. Megan left the courthouse with a copy under her arm and a strange feeling between relief and humiliation. Her life changed completely. She rented a small apartment in another part of the city, a simple place where almost no one knew her. She needed to start over from somewhere. She tried looking for work in smaller companies, unrelated to her previous history, and got a job as an administrative assistant at a logistics firm. It wasn't what she did before, and the salary barely covered her expenses, but she accepted it. The priority was to disappear from the radar. She wanted to stay far from anything that reminded her of the past. She changed her phone number, deleted her social media, avoided saying her last name when introducing herself. She lived as if she were a patched-up version of herself, surviving with what was left. She still received strange looks when she went out in public places. Some people recognized her. Others just stared longer than usual, and that was enough to set off all the alarms in her head. She walked with short steps, always alert, avoiding crowds. She started ignoring unknown messages and rejecting calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Paranoia took over her routine. Megan got used to the silence, the loneliness, the bitter taste of feeling cancelled by the world. She broke a code. Crossed a line. And even though others had crossed it too, she was the one who got exposed. Sometimes, she mentally replayed that afternoon in Travis's apartment. The direct invitation, the walk there, the timed encounter, the false sense of control. It all seemed so distant, so unreal, as if she had lived it outside her own body. But it was her. It was her. No external force pushed her decision. No circumstance justified it. Accepting this was like swallowing shards of glass every day. She tried convincing herself, for weeks, that she was only human, that everyone makes mistakes, but the world didn't want to hear that narrative. It preferred to see her as the villain, as the symbol of what no one wants to admit exists, the woman who cheated, who got caught, who became a headline. Travis remained missing. Some women considered going to the police, but the public exposure was so overwhelming that most chose silence. Shame became a chain. No one wanted to relive it all again in front of a detective, a judge, a prosecutor. And he knew that. That's why he recorded. That's why he kept everything hidden. Travis bet on shame as a shield, and it worked. While they carried the guilt, he vanished into thin air. The attempt at rebuilding was slow. Megan started therapy but quit after a few sessions. She told the psychologist it was useless to dig into what couldn't be changed. She just wanted to learn to endure. Gradually, she began creating new routines. She shopped at the market at the same time every day, took short walks, wrote in an old notebook things she didn't have the courage to say out loud. No plans for the future. No real hope. Just the desire to get through the day without more surprises, without more videos, without more judgment. Brian appeared once, months after the divorce. She saw him by chance at a cafe. He was with a friend. Laughing. Seemed fine. He wore new clothes, his face looked calmer, like someone who had left a heavy burden behind. Megan didn't approach. She stood on the sidewalk for a few seconds and left. That night, she cried silently, lying on the thin mattress in her rented room. Not for the end of the marriage. Not for what she lost. But for the certainty that it would never be forgotten. She could change cities, jobs, names, but her image had already been fixed in a place that no longer belonged to her. People erased stories. The internet didn't. She stopped trying to understand. Stopped justifying herself to herself. She started accepting her own ruin as part of what she had become. Like a scar that burns when reminded of the pain but doesn't disappear even after the skin heals. And so she moved forward. Head down. Promising nothing for tomorrow. Aware that some mistakes, even small ones, drag consequences that are too big. And that sometimes, just one wrong step is enough to lose everything it took a lifetime to build.
Suspicious of your wife or daughter-in-law? Don't go through what we saw in the video. Check the link in the comments and get the ebook with valuable tips and investigator-approved sites to clear your doubts.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.
Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Richard always had a special fondness for Julia. From the very beginning, she made sure to get close to the family, attending Sunday lunches, offering to help in the kitchen, and listening carefully to everyone's stories. It was as if she had always belonged to that family circle. For Richard, seeing his son married to someone like her was reassuring. He felt Michael was in good hands, and for a father, that was a gift. Over time, their relationship grew stronger, and Julia became more than just a daughter-in-law, she was practically like a daughter. That's why on that day, while walking distractedly along the sidewalks downtown and spotting her inside a cafe, something inside him trembled. She was sitting facing a man Richard didn't recognize. The two were speaking closely, leaning toward each other, with serious expressions. She moved her hands slowly, as if trying to convince someone. The man, on the other hand, kept his eyes fixed on her, listening intently to every word. They weren't laughing, drinking coffee, or even seeming to enjoy themselves. It was a heavy, tense conversation with long pauses and steady gazes. Richard felt his stomach tighten. Julia had never mentioned anything about meetings like this. He knew she worked in graphic design, always from home or in familiar settings. And this situation, it seemed out of place. He stood there for a few seconds. He didn't go into the cafe or try to get her attention. He simply watched from afar. He had the urge to keep walking as if nothing had happened, but his feet were slow to obey. That image, though simple, screamed something. There were no signs of affection or any actions confirming something wrong, but the way they looked at each other, it deeply bothered him. It was as if Julia were hiding something. And worse, she seemed emotionally invested in the conversation. Richard walked away slowly, trying to quiet the thoughts swirling through his head. He considered telling Michael, but immediately dismissed the idea. If he was wrong, it would cause unnecessary damage. And if he wasn't, it could be even worse. When he got home, he was quieter than usual. Karen, his wife, noticed the change, asked if everything was okay, but he changed the subject. He preferred to process everything calmly, reflect before acting. But one thing was certain, something inside him had changed that day. During the night, he lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene over and over again. The image of Julia in that cafe kept returning to his mind as if it were a living photograph. It no longer seemed like just an impression. It was as if something inside him was trying to warn him. And Richard was the kind of man who trusted his instincts. He always had been. He'd avoided bad decisions in the past by listening to that instinct, even when others thought it was exaggerated. And this time, he felt he needed to do something. The next morning, he woke up determined. While Karen prepared breakfast, he pretended to be distracted by the newspaper, but he had already contacted an old acquaintance, a private investigator who years earlier had helped a friend uncover a family fraud. He called him discreetly, asking to meet somewhere secluded, far from any family members. It was better to keep everything absolutely secret. He wanted to protect Michael from any unnecessary pain. And if Julia really was hiding something, he needed to find out before it was too late. During the meeting with the investigator, he was direct. He described Julia, told about the cafe encounter, and asked that she be discreetly monitored for a few days. No invasion, no exposure, just basic surveillance to understand whether there was more to the story. The professional assured full discretion. Richard left the meeting feeling slightly relieved but still with a tight chest. The fear of destroying the image he always had of his daughter-in-law weighed heavily on him. And yet, he decided to move forward. Because what he feared most wasn't being wrong. It was discovering too late that his silence had allowed someone he loved to be deceived. 3 days after the initial conversation, Richard received the first call from the investigator. The voice on the other end of the line was firm. Julia had been seen again with the same man. Another cafe, another private meeting. And this time, the detective managed to take photos. Richard opened the email with a tight chest. Julia appeared seated, her expression serious, slightly leaning forward, like someone discussing something delicate. The man across from her seemed tense too. There were no smiles, no physical gestures of closeness. But the energy between them jumped off the screen. There was urgency, concern, intensity, something definitely not casual. He spent the afternoon looking at and rereading that email. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't paranoia. It was a feeling weighing on every inch of his body. Julia, the woman he saw as a daughter, was involved in something she didn't want anyone to know. And that hurt. Because he never imagined one day he would feel suspicion toward her. But although the photos revealed nothing conclusive, the atmosphere between them was strong enough to ignore. With a heavy heart and without mentioning anything to Michael yet, he replied to the email with a direct request. He wanted the detective to investigate the man. Name, address, who he associated with, where he worked. Everything. The investigator responded quickly, explaining that this kind of investigation would require more time, at least a week to track the man's movements accurately, gather photos in different contexts, and cross information. Richard understood, though each day seemed like a month. He spent the following days trying to act naturally at home. Karen, as always, maintained her routine, and Michael visited with Julia on weekends. The hardest part was looking at Julia without his mind tormenting him with doubts. It was like living with a play constantly unfolding in front of him. Everyone laughed and talked, but inside, he sank deeper into uncontrollable thoughts. Every time he received an update from the investigator, his heart raced. The first pieces of information came slowly. A confirmed name, Thomas Blake. A businessman in the construction industry, known for discreet dealings, good looks, and few personal ties. He was divorced, no children. The file seemed clean. But Richard wasn't satisfied. He wanted more than that. He needed something that explained what connected Thomas to Julia. The week went by, and on the 8th day, the detective called requesting a face-to-face meeting. He said what he had discovered wasn't something he liked communicating over the phone. They met at the same secluded location as the first meeting. As soon as they sat down, the investigator handed him a folder with a more serious look than before. Richard carefully opened the envelope, pulling out a new sequence of photos. Thomas was at a restaurant. Then in a parking lot. Next, entering a building known for being secluded and away from busy areas. But what truly changed everything was the last set of images. In them, Thomas appeared alongside a blonde woman wearing a light dress, entering a discreet hotel outside the city. They were holding hands. Talking up close. Looking at each other like people in no hurry to return home. Richard stared fixatedly at the woman's face. His heart pounded. His throat dried. That woman was Karen. His wife. The same woman who slept beside him every night, who prepared breakfast in the morning, who claimed to be traveling for business meetings. The pieces cruelly clicked into place. He had no time to say anything. The investigator confirmed with a nod, Karen Wallace was having an extramarital affair with Thomas Blake. Always discreet, always in secluded places. Everything matched the days she said she was away due to meetings, events, or visits to friends. The pain was immediate. Like a blade cutting through something he always believed was solid. The suspicion about Julia only increased. The image of her sitting across from that man now made no sense. And the doubt eating at him gave way to another question: why would she be talking to her mother-in-law's lover? What did Julia know? Richard took a deep breath. Reality suddenly felt heavier than he could imagine. And now, before confronting the truth with Karen, he knew what he needed to do. It was time to talk to Julia. He needed to hear from her. Because everything indicated she was involved in this story, for a reason that might not even be hers. Richard returned home devastated. The trip back seemed longer than usual, as if each block carried double the weight in his thoughts. He parked the car in the garage and stayed inside for a few minutes, hands on the steering wheel, unsure of what to do. He entered quietly, passed through the rooms like someone carrying an invisible burden, saw Karen in the kitchen preparing something, and looked away. She smiled and asked if he wanted coffee, but he just shook his head and went upstairs. He didn't have the strength to face her. After everything he had seen, the least he could do was wait for Julia's explanation before taking any action. He decided he needed to hear every detail from his daughter-in-law, to understand exactly what her involvement with Thomas was before drawing any final conclusions. There was something about Julia that always inspired confidence in him. And even though his mind was confused, something inside him said there was more to the story. He resolved that only after speaking with her, looking her in the eye, and hearing the truth without any pretense, would he have the courage to confront Karen. Until then, he would remain silent. The next day, even before sunrise, Richard was already awake, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. He hadn't slept well, tossing and turning throughout the night, reliving every image and detail the investigator had shown him. The photos of Karen with Thomas were etched in his mind as if carved there. The betrayal he never suspected had become real, undeniable. But what haunted him most now was Julia. Why would she be meeting that man? Why risk her reputation knowing she could be seen with him? If she was involved in something, why? There was a chance, however small, that all of this had a much bigger explanation than he imagined. And he needed to hear from the only person who seemed to know more than anyone else. It was past 9 when Karen left for work, as she did every morning. Richard watched the door close and remained motionless for a moment. He felt like this was the right moment. He grabbed his cell phone, fingers trembling, and sent a message to Julia. He was direct. He asked her to stop by his house, without going into details. He just said he needed to talk. Julia responded shortly after, always polite, asking if everything was okay. He preferred not to explain. He said it was something quick and that he preferred to speak in person. When she arrived in the late morning, she brought that calm demeanor that always comforted him. A gentle smile, hair casually tied back, and a composed posture, as if she were never out of sync with the world. But the moment she looked at Richard, her expression changed. She noticed the instant their eyes met that something was consuming him from within. He invited her in without hesitation, walked to the table in the living room, and gestured to the chair in front. The environment carried a different silence, the kind that announces something important is about to be said. Julia sat down slowly, trying to hide the nervousness growing inside her. Richard placed the folder on the table and opened it. He pulled out only the necessary images. One by one, he laid the photos from the cafe, of her with Thomas, first. Julia looked silently. She didn't try to avoid them. Her eyes scanned every detail, as if she knew exactly what those photos represented. Then he pulled out the others, the harsher ones, the ones showing Karen and Thomas together. Julia froze for a few seconds. Her hands clasped together in her lap. She took a deep breath. When she lifted her eyes to look at him, she was visibly shaken. Richard didn't raise his voice. He simply asked, with a mix of firmness and sadness, what it all meant. Julia hesitated before responding. It was as if she were trying to find the right words, but all of them seemed wrong. When she finally spoke, her voice was low but firm. She said she found out about the affair by accident. She had left an informal meeting early and, while passing in front of a small restaurant outside town, saw Karen entering with Thomas. There were no doubts. She recognized her mother-in-law immediately, even from a distance. And despite not wanting to believe it, she stood there frozen, watching as the two sat down, laughed, exchanged glances only lovers can share. She was in shock. It took her a long time to leave. She spent days unable to sleep properly. Telling Michael seemed unthinkable. The impact this would have on the family would be devastating. She tried convincing herself she must have misunderstood. That it was a coincidence. But instead of forgetting, she decided to approach Thomas. She hoped he would feel shame, that he would be embarrassed by what he was doing. She tried to talk to him calmly, begged him to stay away from Karen, to leave the family alone. She said it was still possible to save everything, that maybe no one else knew. But Thomas was cynical. He laughed. He said he didn't care what Julia thought, that his relationship with Karen was stable and had been ongoing for months. He even said that if Karen kept showing up, he would keep opening the door. That was a blow. Julia left that cafe with burning eyes, feeling nauseous, ashamed for having tried to talk to a man like him. She said she thought about telling Richard but didn't know how. She feared what it would cause. Afraid of being misinterpreted, of people questioning her intentions. So she decided to keep it to herself, even though it consumed her inside. And even after that second meeting with Thomas, even after the cold conversation and rejection, she didn't tell anyone. She wanted to protect, even without knowing exactly whom. She thought perhaps, with time, everything would fade. But now here she was, facing the evidence on the table, in front of the father-in-law who always treated her like a daughter, with eyes filled with sadness and frustration. Richard remained silent for a long time. He looked at her, trying to absorb everything. His mind mixed the relief of knowing Julia was trying to protect the family with the pain of realizing how much she suffered in silence. He never imagined that his daughter-in-law, whom he had suspected, was actually trying to preserve something already crumbling because of someone else. The feeling was bitter. It hurt knowing she carried this burden for so long, exposing herself for something that wasn't even her responsibility. But now everything was clear. The pieces were finally in place. And the truth, painful as it was the only thing he could accept at that moment. He didn't thank her with words. Didn't apologize. He simply looked at Julia with even greater respect than before. That said everything. She understood. And when she stood up to leave, he followed her to the door. Words would have been useless. But inside Richard, something had permanently changed. It was time to face the other part of this story. The part he least wanted, but which he could no longer avoid. Hours after speaking with Julia, Richard still found himself paralyzed. Even after hearing everything he needed, even with the puzzle laid out before him like a complete picture, it took time to digest what it truly meant. The anguish didn't come from doubt anymore, but from what the truth now demanded from him. It felt as if he were carrying the weight of a bomb about to explode within his own home. He knew he couldn't delay confronting Karen any longer, but he also couldn't imagine how that conversation would begin. Where does one start a conversation capable of ending decades of marriage? When Karen came home late that evening, she found Richard in the same spot as always, but with a distant gaze. He didn't turn around. He remained silent until she commented on traffic and said it had been a tiring day. Routine comments that would normally lead into an ordinary evening. But nothing was ordinary anymore. Richard waited for her to shower, eat dinner, sit on the couch. He wanted to be sure she wouldn't escape the conversation. Then, calmly, he asked her to come to the dining room. His voice was firm, but clearly heavy. Karen went there without questioning. She sat down with mild suspicion. Richard placed the folder on the table and, with steady hands, pulled out the same photos he had shown Julia. Images of Thomas entering the hotel with her. Images from the restaurant. Dates marked in the corners of the prints. Karen only needed a few seconds to understand what it was. Her eyes scanned the evidence with an expression rapidly shifting from confusion to panic. At first, she tried to disguise it, question it, say it wasn't exactly what it seemed. But Richard said nothing. Just stared. When she realized he already knew everything, her arguments collapsed. She started crying. Covered her face with her hands and shook her head. She said she didn't want this to happen, that she felt lost and alone, that the marriage had been silent for a long time. She said Thomas appeared at a moment when she was vulnerable and ended up crossing a line she swore never to cross. She tried talking about guilt, regret, how she thought about stopping but felt trapped in her own life. With every justification, Richard listened with increasing pressure in his chest. He didn't interrupt. Didn't argue. Just listened. When she finished speaking, her eyes were full. He took a deep breath and said only a few words. He said he knew from the beginning that something had changed between them, but he never imagined she would choose to resolve it this way. He said what hurt him most was realizing that the love that held that house together for so many years had been broken by the hands of someone who promised to protect it. He said he no longer saw any point in continuing to live with someone who chose another path behind his back. And that, despite her saying she still loved the family, some actions proved the opposite. He asked for a divorce right there. Karen pleaded, cried, said she was willing to change, that she would go to therapy, leave Thomas, erase everything. But Richard didn't give in. He explained that it wasn't about saving the marriage anymore, it was about saving what little remained of himself. He said he didn't want to live surrounded by forced memories or create a family charade for the kids and grandchildren. Karen tried to touch his hand, but he gently pulled away. There was no room left for reconciliation. From that moment on, everything would be different. In the weeks that followed, the news spread. Michael was shocked when he found out, especially since it came from a marriage he always considered exemplary. Julia, discreetly, said little, only offering silent support to her husband and father-in-law. Family dinners, once filled with long conversations and genuine laughter, became spaced apart. The warmth that used to fill those gatherings turned into caution. Richard spent most of his days in silence, re-evaluating his history. What hurt him most wasn't the end of the marriage, but the loss of trust. It was as if everything he built had been rewritten by hands he never imagined would wound him. And although he knew he did the right thing by trusting his intuition, although he acted with fairness and balance, there was a fatigue that accompanied him from that day onward. It was the fatigue of losing something he believed was eternal. But it was also the beginning of a new phase. One where he could finally look at the people around him and recognize who truly tried to protect that family, even in silence.
Suspicious of your wife or daughter-in-law? Don't go through what we saw in the video. Check the link in the comments and get the ebook with valuable tips and investigator-approved sites to clear your doubts.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.